So if y'all couldn't tell, I really like card games. But ever since Vanguard got rebooted to V and with the subsequent death of Buddy Fight, I've been looking for a game to scratch that itch, something I could fall in love with and get addicted to like I did with Vanguard in 2013. But with every game I tried, I found something that I just didn't quite like. Pokemon was too boring, the lands in Magic frustrated me, and with Yu-Gi-Oh!, honestly, I'm just too dumb for Yu-Gi-Oh! I'm not even gonna lie. Flesh and Blood's cool, but I really didn't like the art. And when you don't like the art and there's no fantasy involved, the cards kind of just turn to numbers on rectangles, and with a game that's so much about math, that gets pretty bland pretty quick. I need something to fulfill my Timmy urges, my inner weeb, but Bandai went and messed up Battle Spirits, so that kind of sucked. Speaking of Bandai, trying to read a Dragon Ball Super card is harder than reading a Yu-Gi-Oh! Card. I haven't heard the greatest things about Digimon, but I'm not the biggest fan of the IP, but I'd be inclined to try it if more of my friends did. No one I know plays Dragon Ball Fusion World, and I hate One Piece. Sorry, just saying it now, I kind of hate One Piece, not gonna lie. I'm really not a big fan, really don't like it. I want nothing to do with it, but that's a topic for another day. There's Lorcana, but that's just Fisher-Price magic. I tried Final Fantasy, and that was okay. Keyforge was fun, but golly were those games long, and I really do miss deck building. I'd be inclined to try Force of Will if that had, you know, a player base. I've seen Elestrals floating around, and the mechanics are really cool, but I honestly just cannot get behind the IP. Something about it just feels off. I think it's the lack of line art. I tried Grand Archive, but is it wrong to say that a game can be too hard? Maybe not hard is the right word, but like almost too competitively minded. Like, there's a reason I don't just go hang out with my buddies and play chess for fun. Sometimes I don't want to be super locked into the game at all times. I want to be able to kind of just go through the motions and have fun. But when I play Grand Archive, I feel like I constantly need to be in the tank at all times, which for some people that's awesome, that's great, but for me, I need something that's just slightly more casual. Now, to be clear, I don't want to throw shade at any of these games. I'm not saying they're bad games, there's just things about them that I don't personally enjoy, and that's fine, because we can have opinions. Except for One Piece. I hate One Piece, it should go away. But regardless, at the end of the day, it's all opinions. I'm just looking for something to make me feel a certain way. And we almost got there, because at about this time last year, I found Star Wars Unlimited. Now, you're probably looking at me and being like, Vacan, you're probably a big Star Wars guy, right? You like Star Wars. You're a big Star Wars guy. You like Star Wars. Wrong. I've seen the movies. I like the Star Wars movies. Everything. I like 1 through 6. That's about it. There's that Clone Wars cartoon, that's really good. Not the animated show. I don't think I really watched that. I saw the movie. I don't think I really watched the show though. But the animated one, the 2D one, that went hard. That was sick. But that's like the extent of my Star Wars knowledge. So really not a big Star Wars guy if you're talking to me. But the game's fun. The game is super fun. The game is so good. It's so good. I'm just gonna yap about it for the next, like, I don't know, however long this video is. I'm just going to talk about that because it's super sick and I just want to talk about it. If you couldn't tell, I didn't script this one. I just have an outline, so we're going to see how this goes. Hopefully this turns out relatively okay. Now, if now you gave me a choice between the big three and I had to pick a game to play, I would probably, surprise, surprise, end up with Magic. Mainly because I think Pokemon is way too boring and Yu-Gi-Oh! Is a little too over my head. I'm a little too slow for Yu-Gi-Oh! I'm a little dumb guy. But 2007, Troop Dupe, you want to play some Troop Dupe? I am always down to play some 2007. Edison, you got it. I'm here for it. But anything after 2015, and I'm lost. Now, I like Magic. I think it's a good game, but there are a couple things that really put me off and kind of take me out of the whole thing. And Star Wars Unlimited just happens to fix just about all of them. So let's talk about it. So in Star Wars Unlimited, you play with a 50 card deck with 3 copies of each card per deck. Already starting off with a banger. This might be a little surface level and uninformed, but I like only having to buy 3 expensive cards as opposed to 4. Maybe you could make arguments against it, I don't know, but if I had to buy a $20 card, do you want to buy 3 of it or 4 of it? You know, I'm just saying, I think you'd rather buy 3. So 3 copies, nice. Now, also, before we go any further, I'm not just going to sit here and yap about the rules. I'm just going to tell you what you need to know to understand why it's so good and why it's so much better than Magic. So I'm not going to go full rules, but there will be enough. By the end of this, you'll probably understand how to play. Now, what kind of card types are we working with? Well, we got creatures or units. We got our spells, which are events. We have enchantments or equipment, which is upgrades. And then we have leaders and bases. Now, if you know me, you'll know I don't really like games with leaders. This whole leader boom that's been happening recently, especially with the Bandai games, but mostly started with stuff like Force of Will, I don't really like it. I'm not a huge fan of leaders. Not my thing, but Star Wars finds a way to do leaders in, I think, the most satisfying way possible. How do the leaders and bases work? Well, for that, we got to talk about the resource system. If you haven't noticed, all these cards got a little number in the top left, and you know what that means? Yup, we got mana, everyone's favorite resource. which not every card game needs to have. You can totally have card games without mana. It's just that mana is kind of convenient and easy, and everyone already knows it, and it provides a really nice balancing mechanic and like paces your game on its own. It's kind of like the game design cheat code. Like, if you don't really know what you're doing, you can just toss mana in your card game, and it, like, fixes a lot of problems for you. But if you're creative and awesome and cool, you end up making something like Card Fight Vanguard. But we're not here to talk about that today. We're here to talk about Star Wars. Now, this is where we're going to get into one of Magic's problems, in my opinions, and that's lands. And I hate lands. And shockingly, I've heard people say lands are the best part of Magic. Please, comment section. I have yet to hear one convincing argument for why lands are the best part of Magic the Gathering. If anything, I've heard small positives that do not even come close to outweighing the negatives. So I'm very lost. I'm very lost when people say that lands are the best part of Magic. I think lands ruin more games than they make games interesting. Like, just look at your opening hand. Too many lands? Can't play the game. Too little lands, can't play the game either. You need to draw, like, the correct ratio of lands just to be able to play in general. Already off to a not great start. And since the resources that are just in your deck, that means if you ever get into a top deck scenario, late into the game, and you just draw lands for 3 turns, kind of just lose. So how does Star Wars fix this? Well, it does the most classic fix of any card's a resource. You can do anything. You want to resource a card, take it from your hand, put it face down, boom, resource. Easy. The problem is, one of the great things about lands is colors. So the great thing about Magic is that you can put anything in your deck. You can play whatever card you want in your deck. There's no restrictions. This isn't like a Bandai game where, oh, my leader's blue, so all the cards I play are gotta play are blue. Or it can be like Lorcana, where it's just like, oh, pick 2, I guess, with no reason behind that. Instead, play whatever you want. But you need to have the right colors of mana to pay the cost of your cards. This means that if you want your deck to work, you can't just play the best cards in every single color. You're gonna have to kind of trim it down. Now, this isn't saying you can't do that. You can totally play 5-color good stuff if you're inclined, but you'll take the punishment of your deck being pretty inconsistent, and you won't be able to cast your cards half the time. But when you have your resources go into your resource row face down, and they don't tap for any specific color, well, how do we prevent 5-color good stuff piles? Lorcana does this by just making you pick 2 colors, which is fine, but a little boring. We can do my preferred method, which is Duel Masters, where the cards go into your resource row face up, and then they tap for whatever color the card is. So basically, all of your cards in your deck serve as both lands and spells at the same time. The issue you run into this is that 3 and 4 color decks become very easy, and you kind of get into that good stuff pile area, and it makes the card design a little tricky. And then, we start introducing some other card game design things that, turn into Yu-Gi-Oh! And now you die on turn 3. If you're playing Duel Masters in Japan. So that's really cool, and we want to avoid that. So what does Star Wars Unlimited do? Well, it locks the color to your leader. Except it doesn't. So here's the way it works. When you're building your deck, you will choose a leader and a base. The base has this little number in the left, that's your health. If your base takes that much damage, you die. It's like if your life points in Magic were just on a card. Now you'll notice that these leaders and bases also have the little color icons in the corner. Now in Star Wars, the colors are called aspects. I'll just refer to them as colors for the sake of convenience, but if you want to know, they're called aspects. The way it works in Star Wars Unlimited is you can play any card in your deck. You can play whatever card you want in your deck. When you go to play the card, first you pay the cost in the top left, right? And then if it has an aspect symbol that is not provided by either your leader or your base, you pay an extra 2 resources for it. That might not make a lot of sense. A better way to describe it is you pick your leader and your base, and those 3 aspects, those are the 3 colors of your deck. If you want to play a card outside of those colors, you can do that, but it's gonna cost you 2 extra resources. I think this is really neat because now the opportunity cost is no longer not having enough colors to be able to play your spells. It is now you can get to play whatever you want. It's just going to be more expensive. So the L that you take, instead of it being, I might just never get to cast any of the cards in my deck, is now I can cast them all, but they're gonna be overpriced. So if I do want to splash, the card has to be really, really good to justify that extra 2 resource cost. As Hannah Montana would say, this really is the best of both worlds. Let's talk about playing the game. So how do we start the game? Well, we draw 6 cards, and then we resource 2 of them. This means you don't have to deal with the stupid early turns of going land pass, turn 2, land, maybe a 2-drop, maybe pass, and then turn 3, you're actually playing the game. Having the 2 resources at the start kind of gets the wheels spinning a little bit quicker, or else most turn 1s kind of just would be a resource pass, and it's, you know, we can just skip the whole step entirely, so we might as well. The real cool part of all of this is that you draw 2 cards every turn instead of 1. This solves another Magic problem. Yay! So in Magic, you draw 1 card per turn, and then you play your land, and you play a spell. This means that every single turn, you are overall going -1 to your hand, because you are drawing 1 for turn, playing a land, and then most often casting a spell. You have drawn 1 card and lost 2. This means by naturally just playing the game, you will eventually run out of cards and enter top deck mode. This happens in Limited all the time. Star Wars not only gets rid of this problem, but then improves upon it. So now, you draw 2 cards per turn, and then resource a card, so you're always going net neutral on cards. But what this also means is that eventually, you'll hit a point in the game where you have enough resources, which means that now, you can just choose to not resource cards, and then keep the 2 cards you drew. So when we hit the late game, instead of getting low on resources and entering top deck wars, we get to draw 2 cards a turn for our top decks, which feels so good. We've gone from Magic, where you can get into a super close game with the top deck war, where you draw a land and then explode because of it, to now a game where you're always drawing 2 live cards. I don't know how else I can describe to you how much better that feels. It's incredible. It's absolute cinema. What about Summoning Sickness? Star Wars says, no. Instead of Summoning Sickness, creatures just enter the battlefield tapped, which is cool because not only does this already kind of imply Summoning Sickness of the idea is the creature can't attack the turn it comes into play. Instead of just making that an inherent rule, the creature now can't attack because it's tapped, it's rested. You can't attack with it. You have to tap it to attack with it, but it comes in tap, so you can't attack with it. But if you can find a way to then untap it, well, now it doesn't sound like this, so you can attack with it. It's just a much more elegant way, in my opinion, of doing Summoning Sickness. Now, this whole enters tapped thing could never work in Magic because of blocking, but we'll get into that in the combat section. You've also probably noticed the board looks kind of weird. It's like split down the middle. This is because in Star Wars, there's not just 1 battlefield, there's 2. Star Wars has 2 different fields. There's the space side and the ground side. And different units can be played to different areas. You put your dudes on the ground and your spaceships in space. What's really cool about this is you're like playing the game on 2 different fronts, because ground units can only attack other ground units, and space units can only attack other space units. They're fighting in 2 different locations. It's almost like if like Magic had 2 different lanes, and you had to pick which lane you wanted to play on. But yeah, ground and space, it's super cool and something you don't see very often. Now, the big thing that makes this game completely different from any other card game, even Magic, and that is the initiative. And in my opinion, the coolest thing about this game. So the initiative, the way this works is that there are no turns. It's not, I take my turn, you take your turn. Instead, a turn in Star Wars is shared. When someone takes an action, whether that be playing a card, activating an ability, attacking, anytime you take an action, as soon as you're finished with that action, priority then passes to your opponent and they take an action. Let's say I play a card, then it goes to my opponent, they can play a card. Then it comes back to me. Let's say I can attack, and I attack. The attack happens, and then it goes back to them, and then they play another card. And we keep going back and forth, trading actions until both of us are done. Once everyone's done taking their action, the turn or the round ends when both players pass. You mostly just pass whenever you have nothing left to do. And when both players pass, you then go to the regroup phase, which typically this would be the start of the turn sequence, but this is at the end of the turn for Star Wars, hence why it's called the regroup phase. This is where you untap all your guys, you draw your cards, you resource, and now you're ready to progress to the next round where someone will then take an action. This is super cool because it means you're always playing no matter what. This isn't like Pokemon where you just shuffle your deck 8,000 times, set up your board, and then pass to your opponent, and then pull out Twitter. But in Star Wars, you get to play the entire time because as soon as your opponent's done doing anything, you get a chance to do something. So you have to really plan out your turns, sort of like you're playing chess, where in chess, every time you move, your opponent gets to move. And if you want to have a plan where you need to make a series of 3 moves, you have to remember that in between those moves, your opponent gets to do something. So you kind of have to account for that. And I think that makes sequencing in this game so sick. Now, the coolest thing is you can take the initiative. Basically, what the initiative means, the player with the initiative gets to take the first action. They get to do the first thing. Star Wars is really cool because as an action, you can just take the initiative. And what that means is there's this little token on the table called the initiative token. Whoever has the initiative token starts the next round with the initiative. So as an action on your turn, you can claim the token. You can go, as my action, I am going to start the next round with the initiative. The caveat for doing so is you now have to pass for the rest of the round. Basically, taking the initiative token ends your turn. Maybe you have a guy who's really important, but you know your opponent wants to kill them, and you want to get value out of them. So what you do is you forego doing a lot this turn, so you can claim the initiative token to guarantee you'll be able to use that card on your next turn before your opponent can do anything about it. But it's really fun, and it adds this next layer of mind games of things you're trying to constantly play around of. I could attack for an extra 2 damage, but if I attack, they're just going to take the initiative token, and if I start the next turn with the initiative token, they're going to be able to use this thing first before I can deal with it. I need to be able to deal with that thing before it blows me up, so instead of attacking, I'm going to claim the initiative, forego the rest of my turn. They can do whatever they want, but this means at the start of my next turn, I get to play my kill spell, and there's nothing they can do about it. It's super fun. It's super sick. I love it a lot. I think the initiative, I think it's so cool. All right, it's so fun. It's such a breath of fresh air. Now, speaking of breath of fresh air, let's talk about combat. So I'm sure you've noticed looking at all the units, they have a attack and a health stat. Now this stat works the same as in Magic, except for one key difference, and that's that damage sticks. What I'm saying by this is instead of in Magic, where at the end of the turn, any damage that was marked on a creature falls off and they go back to full health, if a creature has 2 power and 3 health, if you hit it for 2 damage, it'll go down to 1 health, and it'll stay at 1 health. Whereas in Magic, if you shoot something for 2, and it has 3 health, it'll go to 1, but at the end of the turn, the damage will kind of fall off, and it'll go back to 3. This makes it so you don't have to constantly have dice on top of cards to track what health they're at, which is fair, but also kind of lame. Because when damage sticks, it prevents one of my least favorite things about Magic, and it's the stupid board stalls. I'm sure you've been in this situation playing Magic where, let's say I have a 2-2 on board and my opponent has a 3-3. I could attack, but there's no point because they'll just block it and nothing will happen. This happens all the time in Magic where you get into this board stall of neither player can really attack because there's no advantage in doing so. If I swing with my 2-2, they'll block with their 1-3. Neither will deal enough damage to kill the other. And then my opponent can either pass and have that blocker up still, or they can attack me for free. But if they attack me for free, they'll only deal 1, while I'll deal 2 next turn. They're losing this race, so they're more inclined to just leave their blocker up. And now none of us can do anything forever. Damage sticking completely gets rid of all of this, because now if damage stays, when I attack and they block, I'll deal 2 to their 3, I'll put them down to 1, they'll deal 1 to my 2, put me down to 1, and now in the next turn, if we attack again, they'll both die. Basically, this just means that the board state is constantly progressing. You're never going to get stuck in a situation where neither player can do anything because there's no advantage in doing so. But also, in Magic, you can only attack players. In Duel Masters and a lot of Bandai games, you can attack creatures, but only if they're tapped. But in Star Wars, you can attack whatever you want. They're base, they're tapped guy, they're untapped guy, just as long as it's in the same zone. As long as you have a ground unit and it's attacking your ground unit can't attack a space unit. It can only attack someone in the same lane. But other than that, free game. And it makes playing cards, like, you gotta kind of think about what you're playing. If you play a card to a zone that already has dudes in it, your opponent can just swing into it. As soon as you play it, you pass back to them, they can just go, oh, I'll just attack it, blow it up. Now, instead of the opportunity cost being that if they swing at me, I can swing at them on the next turn because they have no blockers, instead the opportunity cost is they're gonna take some damage back because the units are gonna trade. And that damage is gonna stay. So the more you attack dudes, the weaker your dudes get. So you can't just kind of sit there with a giant board of guys and constantly beat into stuff. Your guys will die eventually. So a lot of Star Wars is kind of trying to get your opponent to attack you before you commit to the board if they do have a big scary threat. It just makes it super interesting because every action matters because your opponent can always immediately respond. So the way you order what you do is incredibly important. I just think that Star Wars' resource system, its turn sequence, and its combat all make for a super refreshing and interesting experience that isn't foreign to card game players, but will really change the way you think and approach a game. Star Wars may look a lot like Magic, and your Magic fundamentals will get you decently far, but the deeper you go, the quicker you'll find it really is a completely different beast. So the combination of that and the things that make it interesting, also getting rid of most of Magic's flaws, I think make it a candidate for one of the greatest games ever. The 3 fundamental deck types of control, aggro, and midrange. This game represents those stupendously. Following the set 1 format was so much fun because you got to watch this in action. Everyone constantly talks about the control, aggro, and mid-range deck, and how they interact with each other, and how aggro beats control, and control beats mid-range, and mid-range beats aggro. And we kind of talk about it a lot, but it's outside of Magic, it's very rare to see that happen in real time. But in Star Wars, it did, and it was so cool. So at the start of set 1, everyone is scared of the Sabine deck, the super spooky aggro deck that would just blow you up as fast as it possibly could, right? Super spooky aggro deck. We know this in most card games, especially the stupid Bandai games. Most card games, their set 1 format, set 1, 2, and maybe even 3 are very aggro dominated because they don't have kind of the pieces they need to really beef up control and mid-range decks, right? So aggro is pretty dominant in early stages of card games. So everyone thought the same thing with Star Wars. They thought Sabine was going to go crazy and was going to run the tables. That was until everyone discovered this green Boba Fett deck. That was bananas. I kind of fell off of Star Wars after I moved back home because there wasn't really anywhere to play. So I was only super involved in set 1, but I'm pretty sure this leader got banned recently. But this Boba Fett green deck was crazy. For Magic players, it was basically Jund. It was pretty much Jund in Modern. Not a 1-to-1, but that's pretty close. It was a really, really good mid-range deck. Super, super good value. And this mid-range deck, as mid-range decks do, walled off Sabine. Sabine couldn't beat through Boba. It would be able to stabilize before Sabine could kill it and take control of the board and then run Sabine over with value. So this Boba deck was kind of running the format. It was basically the tier 0 threat. Everyone was trying to beat Boba Green. And that was until this one tournament, I think in Florida, I don't quite remember, that was won by the GOAT, the Flesh and Blood GOAT, Guy Cohen, piloting this new Vader blue deck. Now, how do we beat mid-range? With control, baby. We had this Vader blue deck that ran like 2 units. It ran like a total of like 6 units plus your leader, and then all the removal it possibly could. It was just removal spell on removal spell on removal spell. And it was like classic OG like permission control. You played this super, super hard control deck, and so you hit a point where you could play this big 8-drop board wipe, blow up the board, drop this stupid giant spaceship on the next turn, to completely take over the game and win off the back of this big bomb. It was classic control at its finest, going 1-for-1 for the entirety of the early game until eventually you can drop your big equalizer board wipe and then establish your bomb to seal the deal. So then what do we do to beat Vader? We go back to Sabine and we play stuff like Sabine and Leia and these aggro decks that could really get under Vader and establish too many bodies for its 1-for-1 removal to deal with. But then as Sabine becomes popular, Boba starts coming back into the meta, and we finally see this perfect triangle of control aggro mid-range happening in front of our eyes. But that's not to say that's all there was. There were a couple other decks running around. There was this Han value deck I remember running around where you played Han and just kind of got to cheat out resources, right? I saw something like Luke Green mid-range that was happening. Like, there's a bunch of other stuff you could do. And honestly, it was such a fun experience. And so different to today when we play like Vanguard and it's like, all right, what tier 0 deck's coming out of this set? Oh boy, we have Reziel and Levy Dress. Cool. We don't see metas grow and evolve like this just because of how decks work. So I really miss seeing this. I really just don't like these IP-based games, because if you don't like the IP, it's really hard to enjoy the game. Let's be real here, guys. One Piece, the game, is fine. Honestly, it's pretty mid. Like, it's okay. Bandai just made the same game again for the 4th time, but it has One Piece on it. So obviously, people are gonna love it because it's One Piece. Not because the game's crazy, right? Not because it's the most deep, complex game of all time. Because it's One Piece. And unfortunately, that's what you have to do to compete in the market nowadays. You can't just make a game with a cool, unique IP like Cardfight Vanguard anymore. People just won't play it. There's too much saturation in the market. You have to stand out. And it's really hard to get people in the door when it's like, oh, look at our game. We have Blaster Blade. We have this anime knight and this cool dragon. People are going to be like, oh, I've seen that before. But then you go, oh, we have Luffy? Oh, they got Monkey D. Luffy? I'm playing that game. I want to play Monkey D. Luffy. I'm going to play that game. It sucks, but that's just how things are. So if you want to make a cool game like this and you want it to sell, you kind of have to slap Star Wars on top of it. Because that's what's going to get people in the door to try out the game and find out that it's really cool and really good. But if you don't like Star Wars, then that's tough. You're kind of out of luck there. Them's the breaks, I guess. Welcome to TCGs in 2025. Can't wait till we get Gundam and Godzilla, you know? And we've seen some games with original IPs show success. We've seen Flesh and Blood, Grand Archive's getting there. You can technically count Elestrals as an original IP, but really they're just not gonna have the initial impact that games like Disney, Star Wars, and One Piece are gonna have. That's just kind of how it is. But with that being said, this is a really long video, and honestly, I just was thinking about Star Wars lately, and I wanted to talk about how cool I think the game is. And this isn't me saying I'm making Star Wars content from now on, or go play Star Wars. If you think it's cool, go play it. I think it's a great experience, but I really just wanted to talk about it for a long time. So if you liked this, let me know. Maybe I'll yap about more card games. With that being said, thank you for watching. I hope you had a good time. I hope you learned that Magic does have problems that can be solved. You can just make better Magic and have it be rad. But with that being said, hopefully Bushiroad cribs some notes from Star Wars and makes their game actually cool and fun. Yeah, that's about it. Like and subscribe.